Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, welcome to the Hyperion Hub, your meeting place for all things Disney. Now your hosts.
Hello and welcome to the Hyperion Hub. I'm John Alois, and joining me is Sean Degenhart.
Heidi-ho, neighbor.
And John Redling-Schaefer.
Hello, hello.
We hope you're having a great week. We certainly are. Before we get started with the show, I want to remind you we are on all the major social media platforms, including Facebook, Instagram, and on Twitter, we're at Hub Hyperion. If you're listening to us on Apple Podcasts, please rate and review us so more people can find the show. We appreciate it. Let's start things off with our Disney View. And this week, I want to talk about a Facebook group that if you are on Facebook, you should check out. It's called Ear for Each Other. I'm going to read the mission of the group. The mission of this page is to provide a space where furloughed and impacted cast members can showcase their side hustles. Let's help out our community keep the lights on during this difficult time. And when you scroll through, there's lots of wonderful artwork. There are trinkets that are being created, cake decorating. There's plenty of services to choose from. My wife actually ordered some Figment earrings, which I love, and that came from Joey Noble. So check out the Facebook group. Once again, it's called Ear for Each Other.
Well, we are thrilled to have with us Jason Surrell. He's currently the Executive Creative Director at Storyland Studios in Orlando, former Senior Creative Director at NBC Universal, and a former show writer, producer, and Creative Director at Walt Disney Imagineering. Welcome, Jason.
Thank you for having me. It's a pleasure to be here.
Yeah, we are excited to have you. So tell us, going back, what was your first Disney experience? What got you hooked?
Well, I think, growing up, we were basically a Disney family, which meant the Sunday night show back when it was on Sunday night. Disney movies, which growing up in the early 70s largely meant a lot of reissues, which would enable you to see all of the classics on the big screen, where they're best enjoyed, as well as live action films like 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea, The Love Bug, really. Even growing up in the 70s, with all of the reissues, I was able to have the same kind of childhood in many ways that my parents did, or earlier generations, with the films kind of just cyclically returning to theaters. So there was that. And then, we were fortunate enough growing up in Ohio to come down to Walt Disney World in Florida for the most part once a year. So I grew up with Walt Disney World and then experienced Disneyland later, but it was pretty much kind of a Disney household in every sense of the word. But it was really, I think, the parks more than anything that captured my imagination from our very first trip in 1975 when I was 5 years old. And that was ultimately, I think, what set me on the course that I would ultimately pursue.
Yeah, was there a moment when you said, this is it, this is what I am meant to do?
I don't know that there was any one moment regarding Disney or the parks. There was definitely a moment where I knew I wanted to be in entertainment. And like a lot of people of my generation, you can trace it back to Star Wars in 1977. And I always had parallel dreams. There was the film and television track on one side and then the Disney dream on the other side, Imagineering specifically. But I think the reason that didn't kind of leap out in front from an early age was because I always assumed, well, I can't do that. I'm not an artist, an engineer, or an architect. And it wasn't until much later that I realized that as a writer and director, I had just as much to contribute to the art of themed entertainment as any of those other disciplines. But like a lot of people, I was a Disney kid, a movie kid, very much a Lucas Spielberg kid of the 70s and 80s. And that was really, I think, what fired my imagination and made me realize that I wanted to be in entertainment in some capacity, I would say from early elementary school on.
Okay. And then you did the college program, right?
Yes. My freshman year in college that summer, I did the Walt Disney World College program, and I was a Jungle Cruise skipper. So it's a great first industry job to have and an even better first Disney job to have, because there's a lot of, romance and aspiration tied to that. Even today, I'm kind of like, I'd go back and do that for my retirement. It's fun.
So the question that everybody wants an answer to, how do you make the jump from Disney College program to Imagineering?
Well, in my case, it was, I would say, both abrupt and gradual at the same time. And what I mean by that is the following summer, I wound up returning to Jungle Cruise for about a month or so. And then I auditioned for the entertainment department and got cast as a character at Epcot. And that summer was when I felt that I truly found my niche, found my groove. I didn't have the greatest adjustment to college. I just didn't really take to it. I was going home almost every weekend. But that summer, I really felt like, oh, this is where I belong. This is where I feel like I fit in. So I wound up transferring colleges from up in Ohio down to the University of Central Florida, thinking, well, I'm going to continue my schooling but work at the same time, because I really bought into the promote from within philosophy at Disney. And even going all the way back to Walt's time, you never know when you might get plucked to do something exciting. And that wound up really being the key to the rest of my career, because literally within a month of moving down to Florida permanently, one of my fellow characters at Epcot said, "Hey, you seem to be a pretty good writer." And I think that was because I had been doing some departmental newsletters, and I would post these David Letterman style top 10 lists in the rehearsal room every morning. He said, "I have an idea for a character Christmas show. Would you want to work on it with me?" And being a 21-year-old idiot, I didn't realize that hourly Plutos didn't pitch shows. So I said, sure, let's do it. And we actually recruited a Goofy who would actually go on to a career with Walt Disney Feature Animation to do some artwork for us. And I wrote up the whole concept and we pitched it. And somehow it made its way through the approval process and got produced. So at age 21, while still in college, I got to stand in the World Showcase promenade and listen to Mickey, Donald, and Goofy say things that I wrote that came out of my head. And that was what really made me realize that my skill set would allow me to have a future in themed entertainment, starting out in live entertainment and then eventually making the jump over to attractions and ultimately Walt Disney Imagineering.
When did you know that you were a writer, or did you just do it as a hobby and got really good at it?
Honestly, it was one of those things where I could always do it, and intellectually I was aware that I could write and that I was a good writer. It just never occurred to me to do it for a living, really, until the light bulb went off with that show. And then perhaps not coincidentally, around that same time, I got heavily into screenwriting, training myself. It wasn't, I didn't go to film school like I had originally planned to at one point. So I was a self-taught screenwriter, and I knew that the art of Imagineering derived from filmmaking, in that all of the early Imagineers were filmmakers, sort of hand-selected from Walt's studio. So that was where the two dreams sort of coalesced, really, because Imagineering is such a derivation from filmmaking to begin with. So teaching myself screenwriting, I think ultimately informed my show writing in themed entertainment as well.
It's amazing to me. You go on to write several books for Disney that include the attractions, that include screenwriting. You wrote a book about screenwriting. You contributed to an Imagineering book. That really is so fascinating to think that you enter this creative world in one way. It's very basic to what you said regarding the origins of Imagineering. Those guys were animators, they were filmmakers, and they go on to make theme park attractions. You never know what direction you're going in when you start, and it feels a lot of that feels authentic to your career as well.
I agree, and I think it's interesting that you point that out, and I don't know that I even thought of that much before this moment, but in many ways it is very Disney, in that even though Walt hadn't been around for decades, it's almost reassuring to think that if you work for the company and have any kind of talent, that ultimately it will come out somehow and be recognized, and you'll ultimately end up where you need to be. So even though it may not quite be Walt coming up to Exitensio at his desk and saying, you're going to go to Imagineering and you're going to write a pirate ride. And X is like, well, A, I'm not a writer. B, I know nothing about pirates, but fine. Yeah. Those things didn't necessarily happen anymore. But and I've heard stories of comparable things happening since then. So I like to think that if you have the talent, if you have the passion, and you put yourself in a place where things are possible. And for me, that obviously meant Orlando, Florida, or New York, or LA versus Cleveland, Ohio. The first step, as I always try to tell young people today, is get yourself physically, geographically, to a place where it's even possible for your dreams to come true. And then once you're there, do everything you can to make your own magic. Throw everything you can think of at the wall to see what will stick. And that's what I did in my early years, and it wound up paying off. And even after that first Christmas show, there were several more years of those sorts of extracurricular activities, pitching shows, pitching enhancements, little things here and there in the realm of live entertainment. And ultimately, when I was working for what was then Disney MGM Studios, a couple of my live entertainment ideas happened to involve the Backlot Tour, which was an attraction. So my superiors at entertainment said, well, we like it, we want to do it, but it involves a ride, so you're going to have to go talk to Imagineering. And I was like, oh my gosh, are you kidding? That's exactly what I want. And that was really what ultimately opened the door to Imagineering.
And I love your point about the geographically possible. This is not always the traditional, well, I went to film school for the X number of years, and then I was an intern under such and such. And I think we've had a couple of folks who on our show who are not necessarily the extrovert. You decided to write the top 10 lists. You had a Jungle Cruise skipper. My goodness, when I think of extrovert, they're class A right there. For those that are creative yet more introverted, it may be a challenge. They'll get to Orlando, they'll be in the college program, and they'll be content helping serve Mickey Waffles down Main Street, USA, versus posting something. Is there still in your mind, we talked about how the talent will ultimately come out. Is that still just, in thinking in terms of the geography, is it just being there that maybe can even inspire an introvert to really take that cautious first step?
Well, it's funny you say that, because first I would say I'm a situational extrovert, in that I was always introverted, really, throughout my youth and into high school, really. But it was really my senior year when I was cast in our high school show choir. And for us, that was a big deal. That was kind of the big time. And I totally did not expect it, because I really didn't have the greatest singing voice, but I had a good enough singing voice, but a good attitude. And, I think just, my director saw something, and that I think was what unlocked something that made me at least situationally more extroverted, where I now had a switch in my brain where I could be like, oh, I'm on stage. So I can get up on a stage in front of 3,000 people and present something and think nothing of it. Yet the thought of going to a cocktail party horrifies me, and I just want to crawl into my shell and die. But your point about more introverted people, I'm going to paraphrase Jeff Goldblum as Ian Malcolm and say, talent finds a way. And, the best example of that for me, one of my idols and inspirations, Neil Simon, was very much an introvert, and yet he was part of the famous writer's room for Sid Caesar's Your Show of Shows and Caesar's Hour. And he would famously kind of whisper his ideas to Mel Brooks or Carl Reiner specifically. And Carl Reiner would say, oh, I think Doc has an idea. Doc was his nickname. So talent will find a way. And even if you're not the extrovert, the shiny object that enters a room, you'll ultimately find a way to put your stuff out there, I think.
Cool. So I'm a musician and produce a lot of events here and love doing shows and the set design, all that kind of thing. So describe for me the process from concept to first performance in the world of Disney, as far as, who gets involved at what stage, and, length of time for preparation? And
Well, it's a little bit different in live entertainment, and then again on the attraction side, live entertainment generally has a much quicker turnaround. And if you're talking about live events, versus a permanent, air quotes, permanent show, those can have a much quicker burn, certainly, than an attraction, which, as you all know, takes years, from the one little spark of an idea to opening day. But they do share a lot of things in common in that early on, you'll generally gather a group of multidisciplinary people in a room, writers, creative directors, concept designers, you name it. It really doesn't matter what your discipline is if you're, as we say, good in the room. So especially when I became a creative director much later, it wouldn't matter to me what your specific discipline was if I thought you were a good idea person, a good concept person, or someone who's good in the room, as we say. And those are the very free flowing brainstorming sessions where you kind of throw everything at the wall to see what will stick, and then it generally would come down to the creative director working with a writer to distill all those ideas into what we think this thing, whatever it is, will ultimately become. And then on an as-needed basis, you pull in the other disciplines. You have concept designers making the renderings and sketching things out, and you bring in architecture, master planning, depending on what it is. Or if it's a live show, you're going to bring in choreographers, costume designers, music directors. But it really is much like the film genre that inspired it, very much a collaborative art. It definitely takes a village to do themed entertainment. But I find that that's really the joy of it, is pulling this diverse group of people together. And to me, it's never really mattered where an idea comes from. With live entertainment specifically, I would open rehearsals on the first night, for example, and say, your active participation in this show is not encouraged. It's expected, because I always want the members of my creative team, my project teams, to truly take ownership of this thing we're working on collectively, so that people can feel valued and safe to contribute. Getting back to that point about the introvert, you want to create an atmosphere that feels safe, where you don't mind presenting your ideas, because it's incredibly personal, incredibly subjective, incredibly emotional. But if you're able to create that safe environment, that's how I think you can really tap into creative minds and really allow them to act at their greatest potential.
Before we get into what you're doing today, can you tell us a little bit, maybe talk about some of your highlights, some of your favorite projects that you worked on with Disney, whether that be some of the books or some of the attractions in the theme parks?
Well, the interesting thing, about the things that have really meant the most to me is I almost feel like the books may wind up being, not to sound pretentious, but kind of like my legacy, in that a lot of people come up to me and say that they really enjoyed them, that it inspired them to get into the industry, which is kind of the highest compliment I've ever been paid for anything. But what's interesting about it was that I began doing them simply because I wanted to read them, and they didn't exist. And it was almost a way, working in the Walt Disney Imagineering office here in Florida, where we didn't have quite the active creative development as they did in Glendale. That's changing somewhat now and in years since then. But it was almost, the books were begun as a way to really keep myself engaged and energized, and then they kind of took on a life of their own. But it's almost like, just to use a really silly example, it's almost like when, you'd go up to William Shatner and say, "Oh, I love Captain Kirk," and he's kind of like, "Well, I've done other things too." In my case, it was like, "Oh, I love your books." And I'm like, that's not really why I got into the business, but thank you. And I don't mean to be flippant about it, because my books are very important to me, especially after I've seen the positive effect that they've had on people. But again, as someone who got into this to create things, I think I'm really excited about just the fact that through the enhancements we've done, I've been able to touch the Haunted Mansion itself and Pirates of the Caribbean and contribute in any way to those classics. And to work on Star Tours, The Adventures Continue, and get to pitch it to George Lucas himself at Skywalker Ranch, to basically originate the concept for New Fantasyland here in Florida and have it, make the journey to California and actually get produced on a grand scale. Those were all big deals for me. And the last year of my time at Walt Disney Imagineering, working on various iterations of what would become Galaxy's Edge, I had the time of my life spending a year, in the greatest sandbox in the world. But I think my Imagineering career is really more cumulative. It's just the idea that over the course of 15 years, I got to touch so many things, rides, attractions, shows, parades, fireworks, spectaculars, resort hotels, cruise ships, vacation club. It really ran the gamut. So in many ways, it was kind of the dream Imagineering career in terms of the sheer spectrum of the things that I got to touch, to work on. And then at Universal, the idea that someone who had the dreams that I did as a younger person, to get to have the top creative position at the park level twice, with Universal Studios Beijing and then later with Epic Universe in its early years, it really is a dream come true. And, I don't take that for granted, and I don't take it lightly.
So what projects are you working on now, especially with your new position at Storyland Studios?
Everything I'm working on at Storyland Studios, I don't think any of it has been announced yet, but there are at least 2 full theme park projects, as well as a major behind-the-scenes type of experience for which I am well positioned after so many years working with Universal Studios Florida and Disney MGM Studios, later Disney's Hollywood Studios. So the exciting thing for me is that the things that I'm working with are really among the most exciting things I've ever had the opportunity to be involved with. So, and the one thing that it proves, I think, for a lot of us who got displaced over the past year of turbulence in the industry, is that there really is life after Disney, life after the big 2, and you can still contribute, you can still create, and you can still bring happiness and joy to people in different ways. And the other thing that's interesting is Storyland specifically offers me the opportunity to touch areas that neither Disney or Universal could offer me. And I have the opportunity in many ways to do the kind of work that Walt was starting to get into toward the end of his life, in terms of civic planning and other ways to communicate with people and bring people together that really go beyond the berm, so to speak. So in that way, it's an incredibly exciting new chapter in my career. And the Storyland team is made up of quite a bit of ex-Imagineers, ex-Universal people who all really share the same philosophy of themed entertainment. And it all goes back to Walt and the principles and philosophies that he set decades ago.
So for all the Star Wars fans out there listening, tell us how you met your wife.
Sounds like a TV series. How I met her. Well, I was directing Star Wars Weekends. I was one of the show directors working on Star Wars Weekends, which was a live event for many years at Disney's Hollywood Studios in the months of May and June. It was a weekend event that kind of celebrated all things Star Wars. And the woman who would become my wife was actually playing Queen Amidala. And there was one day where I walked into the green room where they were breaking, and I just saw this beautiful blonde girl reading Carrie Fisher's book, Wishful Drinking. And I was just like, oh my gosh, pretty girl reading Carrie Fisher. I'm immediately smitten. So of course I went over and started talking to her, and that was pretty much it. The rest was history. And we actually had the opportunity to share that story with Carrie the next year, actually, after we were married. And she was just tickled to death by that. And she signed the copy of Wishful Drinking and said, to Jason and Megan, long may you wave, love your matchmaker, Carrie Fisher.
Oh, very cool.
Just the idea that my wife, Megan, was playing her mother, Queen Amidala, and that it was literally Princess Leia who brought us together is huge. The world of Star Wars has just been incredibly good to me. Star Wars weekend specifically, I became very close with Ashley Eckstein, who played Ahsoka Tano on Clone Wars. She's now our son's godmother, along with her husband David, who's our son's godfather.
She runs her universe, right?
Her universe, yeah. She's an entrepreneur and just kind of an advocate for female fandom, and just an incredible spirit. And she and David really. They're better than any human being really has the right to be, because they kind of throw off the curve for the rest of us. But they're wonderful godparents to our son Jake. And then ironically, it's like, oh great, it's a trend with this idiot. But Warwick Davis and his wife Sammy are my daughter Zoe's godparents. And it's funny because people misread that. They're like, well, what are you going to do if you have a third kid? And I'm like, I guess we'll have to see what Harrison Ford is doing. But it really was just one of those things in that Star Wars has given my family incredible gifts of friendship beyond the inspiration and just the lifelong firing of imagination. And Ashley and Warwick and their spouses really represent the best of couplehood and the best of parenthood that we've ever experienced. And so it's just been really amazing on all of those fronts, the gifts that Star Wars has given me, from that first visit to the theater in 1977 to literally my wife and two of my closest, dearest friends and my kids' godparents. It's just really been a blessing and a gift.
Okay, so let me say real quick, my two of my teenage daughters, Ahsoka Tano is it for them. I mean, her name is spoken more often than anybody else's in this house. So we love Ashley.
Ashley's, I can't say enough about her. I mean, she's just an amazing person. And, just what she's done for female fandom, because, it's hard to believe now, but in the days before her universe, I mean, I can remember being in Disney consumer products meetings where they would literally say, regarding Star Wars, no, it's young boys. It's like 7 to 12, whatever it was. We don't even want the younger ones. It's this. There was very much.
We don't even want the younger ones.
And it was like, are you kidding me? It's like you're literally cutting off half your audience. So,
right. Hey, I'll tell
really
you something. There's a moment in Force Awakens when that lightsaber flies past Kylo Ren and into Rey's hands. My wife started applauding and my daughter went crazy. And my wife had tears in her eyes. This is the most emotional they've ever been because of Star Wars. And there's definitely a place for everybody in the world of Star Wars.
Absolutely. And in the fandom too. And that was what Ashley knew. And that was the driving force behind her universe. And then that led to her anti-bullying crusade and all of these other wonderful positive things that have all come out of Star Wars. So it's really an incredible fandom, and that is not lost, on the folks who make Star Wars. And Ashley's just a prime example of that. Tonight, when I was at Disney Springs, Ashley was doing a speaking engagement at AMC. And she's kind of like, oh, we have to meet up afterwards. And it's just, it still kind of tickles me that, 12 years or whatever it is after that, our first Star Wars weekends together, she's family now. And it's just, that's priceless,
That's great. Well, Jason, thank you so much for joining us. It has been a treat, and we look forward to hearing more coming from you in the future.
Thank you so much for having me. It was a pleasure.
Yeah, may the Force be with you.
And with you, always.
What a treat to have Jason on the show. Thank you so much to him, and thank you for listening. If you have a topic you'd like us to talk about or a show idea, go ahead and send it our way. You can email us at podcast@thehyperionhub.com. I also want to say a big thank you to all the people who are emailing us and connecting with us through social media. And once again, you can find us on Facebook, Instagram, and on Twitter. We're at Hub Hyperion. Have a great week, everybody.
We're glad you could join us. We'd love to hear from you. You can email or send us a recorded audio message at podcast@thehyperionhub.com. Find us on social media on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. The Hyperion Hub is not affiliated with the Walt Disney Company or its subsidiaries. We'll meet you next time at the Hyperion Hub.